Hello everybody, I am Brandon Tackett and this is Brandon at the Movies. Today I'm going to be reviewing Captain Marvel, directed by Boden, Fleck, and starring Brie Larson, Samuel L. Jackson, and Ben Mendlsohn. Captain Marvel follows the Kree warrior Veers as she embarks upon her mission to battle the evil alien race of the Skrulls that happens to end up bleeding over onto our lovely planet Earth. This movie started off right before the first scene even began by altering the Marvel Studios logo into a Stan Lee homage. Instead of scenes of the heroes, they used scenes of Stan Lee cameos, and it put a huge smile on my face. So I, and I assume many others, were primed to like this movie. The question is, did it deliver? And the answer is yes and no. There's a lot about Captain Marvel that I like, and I'm going to talk about those first. Number one, the humor. This is the best buddy cop flick I have seen in years. You know the setup. You got the tight-laced, serious detective with an attitude, and then you give them an oddball partner like a writer or a criminal or their future son-in-law, and hilarity ensues. Captain Marvel does this pretty well, and I can't think of a single moment where the interplay between Larson and Jackson failed to satisfy. But the movie doesn't stop there. Captain Marvel falls on the cosmic side of the MCU, and since that setting was defined by Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor Ragnarok, we get a good dose of the quirky, out-there alien weirdness as well. It also takes inspiration from the funniest beats in the first Thor movie. When Carol Danvers crash lands on Earth, she's a fish out of water, much like Thor was. And while she doesn't wander through the streets yelling for a horse, she does get to have some funny interactions with 1990s America, particularly with the technology of the day, which leads me to my next favorite thing. Number two, 90s nostalgia. I am a true child of the 90s. I was born in 1982 and I graduated from high school in the year 2000. The 90s started around the time I started to understand things and ended as I became an adult. So when a computer disconnected because of a crappy dial-up, or a file took forever to load, or a 90s song snuck into the soundtrack, it put a big grin on my face. Now, the movie doesn't drown you in nostalgia puddle like David Dunn being completely disrespected by his creator, but uses it to accent the atmosphere, which I appreciated. Man, I miss the 90s. I had hair in the 90s. A lot of hair. Anyway, number three, the agenda. Let me put on my serious voice here. There was a lot of controversy coming into this movie, from trolls review bombing it and Comic Gate to a general resistance to the presumed wokeness of the film. In my opinion, it's a non-issue. I've seen movies and TV shows, I've read books and comics where agendas are truly pushed. You can always tell because the agenda takes precedent over everything else. Character development, story, plot, everything. I didn't feel Captain Marvel did that. I never felt preached at. Yes, Captain Marvel is a woman. And yes, she deals with a world where women are marginalized. So yes, that does impact who she is as a character. But at its core, Captain Marvel is an underdog story. This is something we can all relate to. I mean, Marvel has made this movie before. It was called Captain America: The First Avenger. Don't believe me? Go watch the first hour of that movie. It's about a character who gets knocked down and keeps getting up. A character who refuses to stay down. A character determined to rise above the place they find themselves in the world. Captain Marvel focuses on a character and story, and the agenda is an element of the character. So that's my 2 cents on that. I don't even like the fact that I felt I needed to mention that in a film review, but there it is. Anyway, moving on. Number 4, the acting. Leading into this movie, all anyone wanted to talk about was how wooden Brie Larson looked in the trailers. That is anything but the truth. Brie Larson does good work here. She's funny, believable, playful, intense, and conveys solid amount of emotion when it's called for. It's easy to see why she won an Oscar. She's got talent. And Samuel L. Jackson does what I consider to be some of his best work here. For decades, he's played the cool, swaggering badass. But here he's funny, lighthearted, and unsure of himself. But he manages to maintain that attitude that will one day bring him to being the cool, calculated director of S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't want to say too much about Ben Mendlsohn because, well, spoilers, but he gets to play against type here a little bit, and he does solid work. Annette Bening does great. You can tell she had a lot of fun with her part, particularly as the supreme intelligence of the Kree Empire. And then there was Lashana Lynch, who is responsible for causing me to get a bit teary-eyed at one point, so she certainly did well. And Clark Gregg is fantastic, as always, with his limited role in the film. But who doesn't love Agent Phil Coulson? Right? He's the original connective tissue of the MCU. I'm going to really miss him if he ever leaves. Which makes me think of the news I heard about Robert Downey Jr. and his potential last movie being Endgame. I don't think I'm ready for this. This has been a big part of my life for a decade. Anyway. But at the end of the day, Captain Marvel lives and dies, in my opinion, by the chemistry between Larson and Jackson. They are, and their relationship is the backbone of this film for me. And thankfully, there was never a moment where they let me down. Number 5 is Goose. People love cats. I love cats. Enough said, right? Number 6, the fantastic special effects. Speaking of Goose, there's some hilarious special effects involved there. But honestly, at this point, if the MCU gave us a movie with subpar special effects, I would be highly disappointed. We've got energy blasts, tentacles, spaceships, and flying people, and it all looks great. Does anyone remember Neo in the Matrix sequels doing his best impersonation of Gumby? Yeah, none of that here. We have come a long way. Number 7, and my final pro, is the soundtrack. The movie has a great set of 90s tunes, and every last one of them made me giddy for the simpler days of high school. I didn't peak there, but I miss not having any responsibilities. It sure would be nice if I could just go see Captain Marvel on the Thursday night showing instead of having to go clock in and work a 9-hour shift. But, c'est la vie, right? Before I move into my cons, I want to cover real quick a bit of a gray area for me. The action bits are hit and miss for me. Some of them flow exceptionally well with solid choreography and fun little beats interwoven within them. But some of them feel sluggish, lazy, and choppy, particularly in the latter half of the film. I found myself wanting, during the last fight scene, which is set to No Doubt's I'm Just a Girl, which I loved, to be one of those cool, stylistic one-shots like Old Boy or The Protector, but alas, choppy and low energy, I feel, for that one. Now for my cons. Number 1, Amnesia storyline. These lack a well-defined internal conflict for our protagonist or any character that has amnesia, which cripples their character development. And they often cause the story to pick up in the middle of the narrative, which can be disorienting. I know the amnesia is a big part of Captain Marvel's character, but it's just a personal issue for me. I don't really like amnesia storylines. Number 2 is Jude Law. His character never worked for me, and while he plays a pretty key role, he somehow managed to feel completely underused. Now, this isn't Jude Law's fault. As an actor, he did fine here, but the character itself felt off to me. Number 3, weak thematic setup. So, as best as I could tell, the theme and motif of this movie was getting knocked down and getting back up again, and how humanity is a strength. But for the bulk of the movie, no attention is given to this. Also, in the opening sequence of the film, they tell us that Carol's character flaw is that she can't control her emotions. Then the film either forgets this or decides to ignore it entirely. We're shown moments, but we're never given any context. No moments where Carol reflects on them or shows how they affected her, so they end up feeling a bit disconnected from the narrative. This causes the scene where Carol finally overcomes them to be less epic and less impactful. It's like the film was counting on the audience to bring their own personal experiences in, rather than exploring Carol's own personal experiences and how they shaped her into the person she had become. Alright, so, minor spoiler, so I'm going to count to 5, in case you want to skip over this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Early on, they established that there is a device on Carol's neck that helps her control her powers. This device should have been damaged when she crash-landed on Earth, because earlier they set up her character flaw, that she can't control her emotions and therefore she can't control her powers. So if the device had gotten destroyed or damaged when she crashed on Earth, then we could have seen Carol struggling to control her emotions and her powers while continuing the exact same storyline that we do have. Thus giving her an internal conflict and a character flaw to actually overcome. It just seems very strange to me that this was set up in the opening sequence, and not very well either. We were just told. We weren't really shown, just told that this was what it was. But it was set up and that they didn't really do anything with it. Anyway. Number 4 is lacking any sense of danger. So, the movie is called Captain Marvel. So we know that in the end, Captain Marvel is going to win. But there is never a moment in this movie where the thought crossed my mind that she could lose. That made it hard to relate to her. If we go all the way back to the beginning of the MCU, Iron Man. We knew Iron Man was going to win in the end, but there were plenty of scenes that showcased how human he was. I mean, Obadiah Stane left him literally dying on the floor, and then he had to struggle and fight and claw his way to his own rescue. Captain Marvel never really has a moment like that, and for me at least, it caused a disconnect. I had to watch the movie 3 times to figure that out. Yeah, after the first viewing, I just felt like something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Turns out that's what it was. And that leads me to my next con. Number 5, Superman Complex. Once Carol unlocks her full potential, the film loses all sense of stakes. In that moment, you know that not a single threat present in the film will be able to hurt her. And as such, the last act loses all tension and you're left with a pretty colorful, bombastic, and sadly hollow action set piece. It's cool to watch, but pretty empty. Number 6 is the pacing. Almost every scene in the middle of the movie goes on for just a bit too long, and it drags the pace down. For me, particularly on the second and third viewing, getting through the middle portion of the film was a bit of a slog. Which, leads me to an editing issue that I noticed. Number 7, the odd jump cut. I don't know if anybody else noticed this, but during the film's last fight scene, there is a jarring jump cut that changes the location of key characters. I'm not talking a couple of feet, right? But like from one location to a completely different location. One moment, 2 characters are facing off, and in the next instance, they are each in different locations interacting with different opponents. I would love to know what scene was there that was so bad they had to chop it out at the last moment. Number 8, superhero fatigue. After 20 MCU movies, a bunch of X-Men movies, the DCEU, and a slew of superhero-based TV shows, I'm starting to feel it. I had to see this movie 3 times to review it. 3! Because the first time I watched it, I couldn't help but notice how similar it was to every other superhero movie. Marvel has a story formula. It's a good formula, but I, for one, am starting to notice it, and it's causing me to lose immersion. At this point, I think the MCU needs to loosen their grip, let go of the reins a bit, and let the filmmakers go a little crazy. This will lead to some bombs, but I think at least they'll feel fresh again. Well, there you have it. Captain Marvel, the 21st entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What am I giving it? I'm going to give it a solid 4 out of 5. Alright? That's right, folks. This one is worth spending full price on. There isn't anything new here, but it's the familiar done well. MCU fans will enjoy it, and it's simple and fun enough for general audiences. So, there you have it. If you are picking up what I'm putting down, just go ahead and like, subscribe, and Judy chop that little notification bell. Coming up here, I'm going to start trying out a couple of different things. There's a couple of movies that I want to do some commentaries for. Some really bad movies and some movies that I actually enjoy. And I want to start breaking down story structure elements, character development, and stuff like that from the movies that I watch. So if that's interesting to you, you know where I'm at. And remember that no matter how your day is going, whether it's good or bad, it doesn't take any extra time to be kind. So go watch some movies and be kind. I'll catch y'all on the next one.